Bonjour, bonjour à tous. Good morning, everybody. I'll switch to English. Thank you for being here today. It's a great honor for us to be here with you. And Andy, thanks for being with us. Always appreciate it when you come in and see us. So thanks a lot for being here. Andy, I thought maybe I have a few questions for you, but before we get started, maybe I'd love it if you could introduce your journey at Amazon and at AWS and what you've been up to for the last 22 years with us.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, and thank you for all of you being here as well. I've been at Amazon for 22 years, and I took my last final exam in graduate school the first Friday of May in 1997, and I started at Amazon that following Monday. And I didn't know what I was going to do at the company. They wouldn't tell me what group I was going to be in or what my title was going to be or what I was going to be working on. But it was really important to Amazon for some reason I was there that Monday. So I came and I joined an 8-person marketing group. And we split up all the areas in marketing. All the areas were too big for each of us, but we just tried to get done what we needed to get done. And I did that for a few months. And then I was pulled off of that to work on a special project to look at other categories Amazon should consider getting into before the brand cemented as a books-only brand. So I looked at the music business, a peer of mine looked at the video business, another peer looked at the software business. And it was really like writing a business school case where we spent a lot of time trying to evaluate whether our customers would want to buy those items from us and who else was in the market and what we need to do to be successful. And we, in typical Amazon fashion, recommended that we build all those product categories. And I then went back to marketing, and I worked for some time leading our customer marketing efforts. Then I went back to music, and I led product management, and then was the general manager of the music business for a while. Then I went back to marketing, and I co-led marketing for a bit. And then I took this job in early 2002, working as Jeff Bezos' shadow, we called it then, really like a chief of staff role, where we spent a lot of our time together, and we debriefed at the end of the week around what was important and what needed to be followed up on. And for him, it was a great way to extend his bandwidth, just because I've been at the company for 5 years and knew a lot of the people that he needed help driving with. And for me, it was an incredible way to see parts of the company I didn't get to see when I was running functional areas. And so I did that for 18 months. It was a very unusual experience. And I left that job to really go explore whether there might be some kind of business for us in building an infrastructure technology platform that others built their applications on top of, which ended up becoming AWS. And so, anyone who's been at Amazon for a long time, like I have, has some kind of story like that that's just kind of wandered around, and you've gotten to try a lot of different things. It's one of the nice parts about Amazon is there are so many businesses, and the company is so willing to experiment and try new businesses that if you're interested in other things and do an okay job at the company, you get a chance.
Great. Well, so AWS launched its first service in March of 2006. It's been a great journey since then. But can you provide maybe a quick update on the AWS business? And also, you made a lot of announcements during reInvent last year, and we had a replay of this here. And it would be great to see what your thoughts are on that.
Well, the business is growing quickly. It's in the last financial results that we have released, AWS is a $31 billion revenue run rate business, growing 41% year over year. We have millions of active customers, and we consider an active customer as a non-Amazon entity that's used the platform in the last 30 days. And it's really a very broad and diverse customer base. In the first 6 or 7 years of AWS, the majority of the business really were startups, and startups building their businesses from scratch on top of AWS. And these are companies like Pinterest and Airbnb and Slack, and Instagram built their entire business on top of us, and Grail. And here in France, we have companies like BlaBlaCar and Iconosquare and Miro. And it's a really broad group of startups who have built their businesses from scratch on top of the platform. But what's happened over the last 6 to 7 years is every imaginable vertical business segment in the enterprise has started using the cloud and AWS in a meaningful way. And in financial services, you see it with Capital One has reinvented their consumer banking platform on top of AWS, and Barclays UK is moving to AWS, and Intuit's moving to AWS, and Goldman Sachs runs most of their grid now on top of AWS. Most of the big financially regulated financial services companies now are making a move. In healthcare, it's Novartis and Johnson & Johnson and Bristol Myers Squibb and AstraZeneca. And in manufacturing, GE and Siemens and Schneider Electric. Every imaginable vertical business segment in the enterprise now is using AWS in the cloud in a meaningful way. And you also see it in the public sector, where we have 5,000 government agencies worldwide using AWS and 10,000 academic institutions and about 28,000 nonprofits. So really broad and diverse customer base. And yet I would argue that it's still relatively early days in the cloud. I think that we're probably at this stage at the beginning stages of the heart of enterprise and public sector adoption. And it's probably happening faster in the US than it is elsewhere, which are probably 12 to 36 months later, depending on the industry and the country. So it's, I think this is the biggest technology shift in our lifetimes, and it's still relatively early days.
Wow, it's an amazing journey. Were you expecting that growth and that level of adoption when you launched in 2006?
No. I think that, I think a lot of us believed that it had a chance to be successful because we had so many people inside Amazon, and Amazon's a very deep technology company. We had so many people inside Amazon that really wanted these infrastructure services. So we had a sense that others would find it useful, but I don't think any of us had the audacity to predict it would grow as fast as it did. And we had some hints. We had, as I mentioned, a lot of people inside the company who really wanted these scalable, reliable, cost-effective infrastructure services. Because when we asked people inside Amazon, how much of your time is spent building what differentiates your feature or your product versus what is the undifferentiated heavy lifting of infrastructure, we found that people inside Amazon spent 80% of their time on the undifferentiated heavy lifting, which was really surprising to us and a little bit demoralizing for us. And so we had a sense that if Amazon was interested, given how strong a technology company it was, that others would probably be interested. And we had some experiences. We built this business called Merchant.com, where we allowed third-party e-commerce merchants to use Amazon's e-commerce technology to fuel their websites. These are businesses like Target or Marks and Spencer. Their websites for a while were all of Amazon's e-commerce technology. And when we went to provide that solution to them, we had to decouple all the different parts of our platform to be able to let them consume it in APIs. And that turned out to be way harder than we ever imagined it would be. And through that process, we got religion inside the company that we wanted to build in a service-oriented architecture fashion where all the internal development teams in Amazon were expected to have hardened APIs that were well documented so that anybody could use from one another. And that mentality of building in a services fashion, again, it allowed us to build so much more quickly that, again, we thought that others would be really interested in that as well. So we had some hints along the way, but I don't think any of us predicted it would grow as fast as it has. And I think that while it's still relatively early days, I don't think any of us would have predicted the growth this quickly.
So we're in Station F. It's one of the hearts of startup ecosystem in France, and we're absolutely delighted to be here. A lot of people here in the audience are builders and founders, and often we get questions about how do we innovate so quickly. You talked about our innovation pace, and what makes it special? How do we innovate so fast?
Well, we have something that works for us, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, and it may be helpful for others. I don't know, but it's so far it's worked pretty well for us, and we have a pretty fast cadence, both in AWS and across the company. Just in AWS last year, we launched nearly 2,000 significant features and services, and that pace of innovation and delivery has really increased every year. And I think that our consumer business too has launched new capabilities at really an incredible rate. It's one of the least covered stories because people have gotten interested in AWS, but they have really innovated at a fast clip. And I think the things that drive innovation inside of Amazon is a fewfold. I think the first is we disproportionately hire what we consider builders. And to us, a builder is somebody who likes to invent, who likes to look at a customer experience and assess what's wrong with it and be honest about what needs to improve and then seek to reinvent it, who understands that getting to launch is the starting line and not the finish line. I think in technology, you have a lot of people who are V1 folks who really like getting to launch and then lose interest, but hardly anything any of us build is a huge business out of the box. You almost always have to listen to customers and keep iterating on that idea before you have a business. So the first is we disproportionately hire builders, and then we organize them in as small and separable and autonomous teams as we can where they own their own destiny. In the early days of Amazon, we had a different group for product management, a different group for engineering, a different group for operations. And you'd find all this finger pointing where the product management folks would say, well, if engineering had moved faster, we would have been on time. And the engineering team would say, well, if product management had delivered the requirements quicker, we would have been on time. And then the ops team would say, well, the engineering team built this thing and then threw it over the wall, and that's why it doesn't operate well. And what you find is when you put them all on the same team, there's no more finger pointing. Everybody owns it together. And it has a funny thing happens when you make developers answer the page at 2 in the morning for the software they built, the software gets better. And so we found that when we put everybody together on those teams, there was no more finger pointing, there was much higher levels of ownership. And then those single-threaded teams understood their customers really well so that they could change their roadmaps dynamically during the year if they found that what we thought was the priority isn't necessarily what customers think. So we hire builders, we organize them in these separable teams that own their own destiny, and then we give our teams the same building blocks that we give you and all our other customers, which are AWS. And I think the consumer team at Amazon would tell you that arguably the biggest reason that they've been able to invent so quickly has been their ability to use AWS, and they're giant users of AWS. And then 2 other things that I would mention. One is, I think in most big companies, as they get larger, you get what Roy Disney used to call the institutional no, where senior leaders walk into meetings on new ideas looking for ways to say no. And it's not because they're ill-intended or they don't like new initiatives. It's just that there's a lot to manage, and it's often centrally managed, so it feels like one more thing to have to try to figure out how to manage during the year. And also companies get more conservative. And I think that the opposite exists at Amazon. I think that if you talk to most senior leaders at Amazon, their favorite meetings are the ones we get to go into to explore new ideas. And we don't say yes to everything, but the activity that the leaders spend most of their time on in these new product these new product explorations is we're trying to problem solve with the team to find a way to get to yes. And so we say yes to a lot more ideas than most companies. And then the last thing is that if you're going to experiment a lot like we do, you have to be willing to fail. And that actually is a really interesting dichotomy at Amazon because we hire really achievement-oriented type A people who hate to fail. And so having people feel comfortable that they can try new things and fail is really hard, and it's actually really important. And I always found our experience with the phone at Amazon very culturally reaffirming. And that's because, in case you didn't know, we launched a phone. It didn't exactly succeed. And but we learned a lot in it. The way we look at almost everything that we build is we look at inputs and outputs. And outputs, the ultimate output for a public company is free cash flow or share price. And then free cash flow is another output, and profit is another output, and revenue is another output. But you can't manage at the output level. You can only manage the inputs that drive the outputs. And so if you look at the set of goals that we focus on at the company, 99% of them are input goals. And when we looked at the phone, there were actually a lot of good inputs. So it turned out we had what we thought would be a compelling and differentiating value proposition. We had it wrong. But we hired a really good team. We defined a thoughtful product. The team built really amazing technology in a timely fashion. So a lot of the inputs were good. And so a lot of the people who worked on that, we allowed to go find great jobs on something different and have good landing spots. And then we took the technology that we built as part of that and used it in other initiatives. And I think if you don't have great places for the people who did a good job in the inputs on products that didn't work to land, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Nobody good will work on the new initiatives because they think it's the end of their career. And so I think when you have a culture that hires builders, organizes them in such a way where they control their own destiny, give them the building blocks to move fast in AWS, try to find ways to say yes to a lot of ideas, and then tolerate failure if new ideas don't work, what you find is that you end up getting new ideas from everybody in the organization, not just the senior people, but people spend their weekends and their free time thinking about new ideas because they know they have a chance to try them, and they know if they try them and they don't work, it's not the end of their career.
Right. And so you talked about the building blocks, and today the number of startups that work and select AWS is truly impressive, whatever stage they're in, whether they're just being incubated or scaling up or unicorns. Why do you think that is? And maybe also we could explain some of the programs we have to support the development of the startups.
Well, I think that if you're a startup and you have a new idea and you're taking the risk to start a business, which, by the way, I think a lot of people who aren't entrepreneurs don't always understand what an incredible risk that is. And it's not just a financial risk and an opportunity cost risk, it's also an emotional risk. It's hard to start businesses. And I think everybody in this room knows that, and I've been a part of starting some businesses as well. It's not easy. And so, I think that when you're trying to start a business, you want as many benefits and as you possibly can have that give you a better chance of succeeding. And I think that in the old days before AWS and before the cloud, if you were a startup, you'd have to go raise money. You'd have to spend most of that money on data centers and on hardware, and then you kind of got one shot at trying your idea. And if it didn't work, you had to try to raise again. And a lot of times, if you took your one shot, it wasn't successful, it wasn't easy to raise money. And so the cloud allows you, instead of laying out that capital expense before you know whether you're going to have something successful as a startup, it allows you to only have to pay for the infrastructure as you consume it. So it turns capital expense to a variable expense. It's a lower variable expense than any company, even large enterprises, can do on their own. And then it gives you real elasticity. You don't have to predict ahead of time how much capacity you need. Everybody has to provision for the peak if you have to predict ahead of time, because you can't afford having an outage if people need more capacity. So there's a lot of wasted capital. With the cloud, you get perfect elasticity that way. And so that's a very different cost model than what's existed in the past for startups or for any company. And then it also allows you to move much more quickly. If you have on-premises data centers, it often takes you many weeks to deploy a server, and then you got to build all the surrounding infrastructure around it. And in the cloud, you can provision as many servers or instances as you need as quick, in minutes. And then we have 165 plus services that you can use in whatever combination you want, only paying for what you consume. And so that allows you to get from idea to implementation in several orders of magnitude faster. Then for most companies, the scarce resource tends to be engineers. And if you don't have to spend that scarce resource on the undifferentiated heavy lifting of infrastructure, which is important, but it hardly ever differentiates your business, and instead get to spend that scarce resource on what truly differentiates your mission and your business, that's very attractive. And then for most companies, even startups today, right from the get-go, you have global end users. In the old world, you'd have to serve those end users from one or two infrastructure spots that you owned or that you knew. And Amazon for a really long time served our Japan retail business out of Seattle. Because it's hard to find reliable, cost-effective infrastructure providers in lots of countries. But with AWS and with the cloud, we have regions all over the world, so you can provision your applications and infrastructure all over the world and have lower latency to your end users wherever they are, and then data residency in the countries where that's really important. So those are reasons why I think it's very compelling for startups and really for companies of any size to move to the cloud. Now, we try to do a lot of things to help our startups. And when we wrote what we call the vision document for AWS, we don't do PowerPoints at Amazon. We only do these 6-page narratives. And so we wrote a vision document to propose the business. And the mental model we wrote was that we wanted to enable any individual in his or her own dorm room or garage to be able to have access to the same infrastructure and cost structure as the largest companies in the world. And so we had always thought of our business as really being one that could help startups build the next enterprises of tomorrow. And so we try to do a lot of things. We have a program called AWS Activate where we help customers and startups, not only with credits where we give startups up to $100,000 of credits to get rolling and to build their applications, but also with a lot of help. And we have solutions architects, we have people here at Station F that help. And we have a mentoring office hours program here at Station F, which really, again, designed to help you do everything from use AWS as optimally as possible to also, if people want help in thinking through different business problems, you may or may not want our help, but we have a lot of people who've worked with a lot of startups where we're always happy to help. And, we also have a pretty significant set of customers at this point in AWS and a significant field team that goes and talks to customers. And so for a lot of our startup customers who are ready to sell to enterprises and mid-sized companies, we also find ways to introduce them to enterprises, both through our field as well as through some programs we have. So for us, being some small part of lots of startups really changing customer experiences and becoming successful companies is one of the most inspiring things we get a chance to work on.
Great. And so as you know, Andy, we have great programmers, great engineers, data scientists in France. And right now, I think AI and machine learning is at the top of everybody's mind, whether it's startups and enterprises, government organizations. You made some great announcements lately of what AWS is doing on that regard. Maybe we could share it with the room here.
Well, machine learning is something that people have talked about for a really long time. And we've been doing machine learning at Amazon for over 20 years. It's in almost everything we do. If you think about the product recommendations we make in our retail business, if you look at the pick paths and how people pick items in our fulfillment centers, if you look at the drones we're building, if you look at these Amazon Go computer vision stores that we've built, if you look at Alexa and the natural language understanding and automatic speech recognition there, we've been doing machine learning for a really long time. But most companies have really dreamed about doing it, but haven't had enough people with the right skills to do it, and more importantly, the right services and capabilities that enable it. And I think we're just starting this golden age of machine learning, where in the future, I think if you look 10 years out, most of the applications are going to be infused in some way with machine learning of some sort. And I think the way we think about machine learning and AI is that there are three macro layers of the stack. At that bottom layer is for expert machine learning practitioners who are comfortable building models and training and tuning them and deploying them into production. And they're also comfortable dealing with the framework level. And I think that most of the providers in the space are largely funneling people into TensorFlow. And we have a lot of customers who use TensorFlow. 88% of the TensorFlow that runs in the cloud runs on top of AWS. So we have a lot of experience with it. But having done machine learning ourselves for 20 years, there are different use cases where different frameworks scale the best. So if you look at computer vision, it turns out that PyTorch 2 and Cafe 2 are great solutions. Or if you are doing recommender systems or video analytics or natural language processing, often MXNet scales the best. And so we support them all equally well. And we have a very strong feeling that you don't want one tool to rule the world. Anybody who tells you they have the one tool that will solve all your problems, you should be highly suspicious of. Because those who have to solve hard problems know that a Swiss Army knife is rarely the answer. You want the right tool for the right job. It saves you time and it saves you money. And so we support all those frameworks equally well to get today. I expect that there'll be new ones in the next 18 to 24 months that we'll also support. Now, there aren't that many expert machine learning practitioners in the world. And if you really want to have machine learning expand to all the companies that want to use it and should use it, you have to make it much more accessible to everyday developers and data scientists. And that's what we've tried to do at the middle layer of the stack with SageMaker, which really is a managed machine learning abstraction that makes it easy for everyday developers and scientists to visualize their data, have the right algorithms and frameworks baked in, to be able to do training, through one click, to training in a fault-tolerant way, to do automatic tuning, to be able to deploy in production in a fault-tolerant way, again, with just a few clicks, to be able to get labeling and ground truth for a lot of the computer vision models you need. SageMaker is a total game changer in making it much easier for everyday developers to be able to build machine learning models. And it's kind of amazing, just in the 2 years we've had SageMaker, how many thousands of companies have standardized machine learning on top of it. It's very exciting, and it's changed what people can do. And then at that top layer of the stack is what people often call AI services, because they closely mimic human cognition. And they often are, there's services where customers don't want to have to build the models and the algorithms themselves. They want to give us inputs and use our models, and then get answers back through an API. And so these are services like text-to-speech, or audio transcription, or translation of to many languages, or natural language processing for those translated, transcribed big pieces or corpuses of text, to OCR, including having great OCR of data that's in tables and forms. A lot of our customers said Amazon knows a lot about personalization and a lot about forecasting, given what we have to do in the supply chain. Could you make those services available to customers? So we announced a personalization service and a forecasting service at our conference at reInvent in early December. And so we have a large number of these services across all 3 layers of the stack. I personally believe that most technology-savvy companies will use all 3 layers of that stack. They will also use, we're building a number of chips that make it easy for customers to have the best possible performance on top of the infrastructure they're running. I think if I had to pick one area of that stack that I think is the single most important, I would say it's going to end up being that middle layer. And that's because virtually every company of any size is going to have massive amounts of valuable data, where they're going to want to allow the broad set of developers and scientists of their company to be able to build machine learning models and get value out of that data. Right. And SageMaker makes it so easy that that this probably, I think, the single most important layer, but I think most companies will use all 3.
Right. So we talked about technology, but earlier you talked about how we hire builders at Amazon. As startups scale, oftentimes we get asked about culture, right? And how, as you scale, culture is so important. How do you think about culture at Amazon and experiences that we might be able to share?
Well, I think that, I've been at Amazon for 22 years, so I have obviously drank the Kool-Aid, and I like the culture. and I think there are a lot of things that are really unusual about our culture. And we have these 14 leadership principles that we are very passionate about, and I think have been incredibly important in our ability to scale as we've grown the absolute number of people and where we locate people. But I think there are 3 things that I would point to about the culture that are different, especially different relative to other technology providers. I think the first is that we're unusually customer focused. And I think that most technology companies tend to be competitor focused. They look at what other companies are doing and then try to one-up them. And when there are some technology companies that are product focused, where they say it's great that you have ideas about the product, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, but you should leave that to the experts. And those strategies can work, but they're just not ours. We are driven by what customers tell us matters to them. And so most of what we build is driven by listening to customers and what they need. And the rest of it is just listening to customers' requests, and even if they can't articulate a feature or service, we try to read between the lines and invent on their behalf. And so we're unusually customer focused. And then we tend to be inventors and pioneers. I think most technology companies are fast followers, or they acquire their innovation. And again, that could be a strategy that works. It's just not ours. We think that in a space as dynamic and fast-moving as the cloud is, remember, we launched 2,000 significant services and features just last year. Being partnered with the provider that has the largest business, the most number of customers, the largest ecosystem, that has a vision for how all these services fit together, as opposed to somebody who's just trying to match what somebody else is doing and patch it together and acquire somebody here or there, is, there's an advantage being partner with the provider that's got that vision for that. And then, the third thing is that we're unusually long-term oriented. And so, most technology companies are really interested in customers when there's a deal to be done, and they'll show up at the end of a quarter or the end of the year and harass customers into a deal and not to be heard from again until the next time it's due to, it's time to do a deal. And that is not how we think about the world. We are trying to build a set of relationships and a business that outlasts all of us in this room. And something I think that ties that together well is we have this capability in our support function called Trusted Advisor. And we look at dozens of ways that our customers use our platform. And if we think they're sub-optimized, we'll tell them. And one of the things we look at is if customers are paying for resources that they're really not using or have low utilization, we'll send a notification and say, hey, you should stop paying for it. And over the last few years, we have sent millions of these notifications to customers that have now resulted in annualized actual savings for customers of over $500 million a year. And so I ask you, how many of the people you work with and the partners you work with will tell you to stop spending money with them to the tune of $500 million a year of lost revenue? I'm going to guess not that many. And I think when we first started doing it, people thought that maybe it was some kind of gimmick, but if you understand our culture, it makes perfect sense. We don't want to make money from customers and they're not getting value out of it. And we want to try and reinvent a space that we think had been pretty broken for customers for a long time. And then if you really want to build a business that outlasts you, you have to do right by customers over a long period of time. So I think those are some things that are unique about the culture.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. As we talk about the relationship between our customers and AWS, I think oftentimes we get questions about vendor lock-in also, and that's a little bit the continuation to what you just talked about. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I certainly understand why people are worried about getting locked in, and I think our friends at Oracle have made people very aware of that. And so, I think that, first of all, if you look at the cloud, it is a lot easier to move away from an infrastructure technology provider than it is something like an Oracle. First of all, if you look at the APIs we have, most of the later coming cloud providers' APIs look an awful lot like ours. We have migration services that make it easy for you to move VMs into AWS or back out of AWS, or same thing on databases or on storage. We build on a lot of open standards like Linux and MySQL and Postgres and all the open frameworks and machine learning. And so we have been very fortunate in the 13 years we've been doing AWS that we haven't had too many customers move away from the platform, in part because the security and the operational performance have been really strong, and because we've iterated at a really fast clip, and because of the way we treat customers. But customers have done it. Zynga, the big gaming company, decided at one point that they thought they could run the infrastructure better than us, and they moved to their own data centers, and then it turned out they felt like that wasn't the case. They could run it better than us and moved it back to AWS. Or Instagram, who built their entire business on us, when they were acquired by Facebook, they ended up moving to Facebook data centers because Facebook wanted them to move into their data centers. So, we've had customers do it, and it's work, but it wasn't a crazy amount of work. But you can do it if you want to do it. And, I think that when you look at companies thinking about multi-cloud, first of all, for startups, I think it's particularly nutty to be multi-cloud. You have a lot of things to do. I think most enterprises start off as they're moving to the cloud thinking that they may be multi-cloud in some kind of even way, but very few end up there. Most predominantly choose a cloud provider, because if you don't, you have to standardize on the lowest common denominator, and these platforms are in pretty wildly different stages at this point. And you also, if you look at your development teams, it's typically a pretty big task to move from on-premises to the cloud. And so to ask them to be fluent across multiple platforms is something pretty unpopular with development teams. It's very unproductive and wasteful, people and resource-wise. And then all the cloud providers have volume discounts, so you end up delevering your buying power if you split it across a bunch of clouds. So what we find is that most companies predominantly choose the cloud provider. There are some who say, I want to make sure I know how to run on somebody else in case something goes sideways with the cloud provider I choose. but it's much more like 90-10 and 80-20 than it is like 60-40 or 50-50.
Great. Well, one of the other mega trends we're seeing is around IoT and devices at the edge. We've talked about moving data to the cloud, moving workloads to the cloud. But what's your view on connected devices and computing at the edge?
Well, I think that it's, if you fast forward 10 years from now and you talk about this concept of hybrid, I think the on-premises part is not going to be servers. I think they're all, virtually all moving to the cloud. I think the on-premises part of hybrid is going to be devices, at the edge, and assets at the edge. They're going to be everywhere. They're going to be trillions of them. They're going to be in our homes, in our offices, in factories, in cars and planes and ships, in oil fields and agricultural fields. They're just going to be everywhere. And if you think about these devices, almost by definition, they have relatively little CPU and disk. And it's why the cloud is disproportionately important in supplementing them. And most of the big IoT implementations today are using AWS to supplement them. And whether you're talking about Engie here in France, where with what they do with their meters, or if you look at Illumina, they have their genome sequencing hardware set up with AWS to do analytics. If you look at John Deere, they have hundreds of thousands of telematically enabled tractors that are collecting planting information in real time and sending it to AWS and doing analytics and then sending that data back down to the farmers. There's a large number of these IoT implementations today that are leveraging AWS in the cloud. And what we increasingly see is that a lot of our customers who have assets at the edge, they want a single pane of glass and a single programming interface so they can set up which actions they want to actually be triggered and happen in the cloud, and which ones they want to be triggered and happen on the device itself when they don't want to take the latency and the round trip to that cloud, or they just don't have the connectivity. And so we built something called Greengrass that makes it easy for our customers, whether they want to actually do the processing and the analytics and the compute in the cloud, or they want to do it on the device themselves to be able to do so. And it's kind of amazing. You just look at, even if you look at Rio Tinto, and what they do in their mines, they have these huge vehicles that go down these winding roads down into the mines, and the roads have all kinds of sharp objects on them. And it turns out when they blow a tire, it costs them about $30,000 a tire. And so they've basically started using Greengrass, where they don't have great connectivity back to the internet in these mines, where the vehicles that are further down the road are able to detect when there are sharp objects and then communicate that to the people operating those devices and those vehicles further up so they don't blow a tire. And so there's so many of these use cases today. I think that people are going to want to get access to the information of these assets at the edge, do analytics in the cloud, build machine learning models in the cloud, and then push those inferences and predictions and actions it wants to take on the device themselves. We already see a lot of that happening. I think you'll see a lot more moving forward.
Good. So Andy, I think we've got time for another couple questions. One is, we talked about AI, we talked about IoT and the edge. What do you think are some of the other big trends that are coming?
Gosh, there are a lot of them, Julian. It's I could spend a couple of hours on that. But I'll mention a few. I think that compute, part of what you're seeing is that the basic unit of compute is continuing to get smaller. I think people will use our EC2 instances for all kinds of workloads for the foreseeable future, but more and more companies are using containers. Most providers will have a container service, typically a managed Kubernetes service, which we also have in something called EKS, which is growing really fast. But we also have a container service that we built before Kubernetes got traction called ECS, and our Elastic Container Service. And we find in managed services, having two different offerings there allows customers to choose what's most important for them. So those that want the container service that's most deeply integrated with our platform and all our features choose ECS, because since we control that, it's easy for us to launch every feature integrated with ECS. Those that want Kubernetes as the primary factor in what they want in a container service use EKS. EKS is pretty well integrated with AWS as well, but not as deeply integrated because you have to work with the rest of the community, and some of those capabilities take longer to get the community on board with. And then we have a lot of customers who don't want to actually operate at the server or cluster level at all. They want to actually operate at the task level. And so we built a serverless container service called Fargate that allow customers to operate just at the task level that's growing like crazy. So we have 3 container capabilities versus most that have 1. Also in the smaller unit of compute, you see more and more companies who are using event-driven serverless computing, which we pioneered with something called Lambda a few years ago, and it's totally mind-blowing how many customers, hundreds of thousands of customers who are using Lambda. And it's not just the compute part of serverless, it's actually building workflows that allow you to set triggers where end-to-end you're able to get applications done using a lot of services. Most companies that have serverless capabilities have maybe about half dozen services that work with their serverless capability. We have about 50 that work with our serverless capability. So we see the basic unit of compute getting smaller. We see databases changing a lot. People are pretty sick and tired of the older guard commercial grade database offerings. These are the Oracles and the SQL servers of the world where they're expensive, they have high lock-in, they're proprietary, they're constantly auditing their customers and then fining them when they find discrepancies. And it's why so many companies have been moving to these open engines like MySQL and Postgres. But to get the performance on those open engines that you get on the commercial grade databases is hard. And so customers asked us to work on that, and it's why we built Aurora, which has both a fully MySQL compatible edition and a fully Postgres compatible edition. So if it turns out that you want to move from Aurora, you can just use the community editions. But it has as strong availability and durability as the commercial grade databases at 1/10 of the cost. It's the fastest growing service in AWS in our history and has been for the last 4 or 5 years. And it's incredible how many companies are moving from the older guard databases to Aurora. But one of the other things we see in databases is that the day of companies using relational databases for every workload have come and gone. Most technically sophisticated companies, again, want the right tool for the right job. And so if you have something like Lyft, which runs completely on AWS, and you have millions and millions of drivers and coordinates of locations, what you really want is a very low latency, high throughput, scalable key value store. A relational database is way more complexity and way more expense and trouble than a key value store. And so for a key value store, we build DynamoDB. For in-memory cache, we build Elasticache. For social and big social databases that require graph capabilities, we built Neptune. For those who are running at the edge and with IoT that have a lot of time series data, we have TimeStream, which is a time series optimized database. For those that need a ledger, we have built QLDB. And so, again, trying to give you the right tool for the right job, which saves you time and money. So databases are changing quite a bit. I think we talked about machine learning, we talked about the edge. I think that robotics is an incredibly interesting new area that we do a lot of robotics at Amazon in our fulfillment centers, but I think there's a whole bunch of capabilities that robots are going to do over time that today they're not. And then voice would be the other one where, I remember when we all first had apps on our phone, it was so cool to be able to tap a few times and have the data, available to you locally. But when you use great voice apps, tapping a bunch of times on your phone seems so circa 2009. I mean, I think the amount of voice applications that are going to be out there and what they'll enable you to do will totally revolutionize customer experiences. So those are some of the areas. There are a lot, obviously.
Right. Okay, great. Andy, we've talked about a ton of things, right? We talked about culture. We talked about your 22 years at Amazon, and we've talked about technology, AI, ML. We've talked about our long-term focus, and I think we've spent a great 15 minutes together. But if there was one lesson that you've learned that maybe would be helpful for the rest of the community here, what would it be? And that will be, I think, our conclusion.
I think there's a couple things, and again, each of our experiences are different, so it's always hard to translate what you've gone through individually to everybody else. But I would say there are kind of 2 categories of thoughts. One is just the quality of your team. I think that everybody knows that you have to hire well. Everybody wants and thinks that they have a high hiring bar. But I have found in my own experiences that the quality of your people is going to be a really big differentiator in whether you're successful or not. And it's easy when you're growing fast and you have a lot to get done and you see the opportunity to lower the bar on who you hire, because you convince yourself, well, maybe they're not great, but they're good enough. They can do the job. And when you lower that bar, it always has broader, deeper, and longer-term ramifications for you, both in the quality of what they build and who they hire, and people want to work with other people they highly respect. And so I would tell you, don't lower the bar. And I'd also say that, one of the mistakes I made early on in AWS is that I knew in the first initial set of leaders that I'd hired that I didn't have some of the right people. And human instinct is to try to figure out a way to make them work, because you spend a lot of time hiring them, recruiting them, and convincing them to come, and you like those people. And I think oftentimes we know much earlier than we take action that we don't have the right people. And I think that when you know you don't have the right person, you're doing both yourself and your company a favor in making a change, because most really strong people don't like to be in jobs where they feel like they're not succeeding. And so you allow those people to get into jobs where they can feel like they are succeeding and good about themselves. And at the end of the day, as entrepreneurs and running businesses, we have a responsibility to try to, to the investors and as well as our customers, to try to build the best possible experience. And you need the leaders are so disproportionately important and leveraged that I would say that when you haven't picked the right fit to take action on it. I've never been in a situation where I took action too soon when I didn't have the right leaders. And then the second category I would say would be just to, as much as you can, there's so many distractions when you're building a business. And there's so many ways to waste energy and to spend energy and to be stressed about. And if you can find a way to control what you can control, it's really powerful. And it sounds much simpler than it is to actually enact. But I can remember in the early days of AWS, when we were building AWS, a lot of really talented, great engineers and product builders would come in my office, and they would spend time saying to me something along the lines of, why are we doing this? We're an e-commerce company. We have a set of e-commerce APIs people have adopted. Why don't we just focus on that? We know that's going to be successful. Who's going to buy storage from us? Who's going to buy compute from us? Who's going to buy database from us? And what I would often share is that while that may end up being true, if you want to have a chance to do something broader, we've got to start there. We can always revert back to just e-commerce. But at that time, for Amazon to have been a significant player in this technology infrastructure space, we had to be first to market. People weren't thinking of us as a business-to-business technology provider. And so we had to pursue the broader initiative and try it. And then if it turned out we weren't successful, we could always scale it back to just e-commerce. And I remember I would go home at night after these days, and I would be talking to my wife, and she would ask me how my day was, and I would say, well, I just felt like I was doing therapy all day. And I would explain these conversations, and she would look at me, and she would say, well, are you sure you're going to be successful? And I would say, I have no idea. I really, truly have no idea. But the one thing I convinced myself of through a lot of trial and error and a lot of stressing about various things the first year and a half we were building was that I knew that what we were trying to do was hard enough that it needed all of my energy. I couldn't consume energy and stress worrying about what if it's not successful, because none of us knew, and none of us could control that. But what we could control was hiring great people and building great teams and listening to what customers wanted and building great products that solved customer problems. And so I think as much as possible, where you can just focus your energy, don't get distracted by whether it's going to be successful or not, or who says what about your product, or who's competing with you. If you build a great product with a great customer experience, and you listen to customers and keep iterating, you're going to have a successful business over the long term. Control what you can control.
I think that's a great conclusion, Andy, and I really appreciate you being here, and I know how excited you are about the startups in France, and so thanks a lot, and thanks for answering my questions.
I appreciate it. Thanks for being here, guys. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.